This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it. Guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Hello, this is Simon Brew. I'm the editor of Film Stories magazine, and a very warm welcome to a special episode of the Film Stories podcast.
Sorry about that. I literally had to fly in from outer space.
Come with me.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
In movies that had stories.
That the story just sucks them in.
This is just the beginning.
Stories. We would be honored if you would join us.
Hello and a very warm welcome to Film Stories with Simon Brew. I am Simon Brew, as always, that's all you need to know about me. The aim of this podcast is, I talk of the stories of films. Title gives that one away. I talk about development stories, production stories, marketing stories, behind the scenes stories, all the bits and bobs really that go to make films that we know and sometimes love. Just that, the films that we know and sometimes love. Every now and then I record a special episode of this podcast, and what do you know, you've landed on one of those now, where I bring in a special guest to talk about their film and their work. And so shortly I'm going to be joined, I'm going to play you something that I recorded with him, by Pete Docter, the director of the incoming Pixar film Soul. Also he's directed the likes of Monsters Inc., Up, and Inside Out, and in 2018 he also became the Chief Creative Officer at Pixar after John Lasseter departed the company. Just to set the scene a little bit on this movie, it's directed by Docter, produced by Dana Murray. The screenplay credits gone to Pete Docter, Mike Jones and Kent Powers, and Kent Powers, and I'll be touching on this in the interview, is also the co-director of the film. The voice cast led by Jamie Foxx and Tina Fey, and the movie was originally set for cinema release. It's debuted at the London Film Festival over the past week, which is why I'm being able to talk about it now. It goes to Disney Plus, as I'm sure I'll remind you at the end of this podcast, on Christmas Day. I have seen the film. There are no spoilers for the conversation within this chat that we're about to have. Just that I really think it's a terrific piece of work. The story of it actually goes back to 2016, although further back in Docter's head, but it was back in January 2016 where Docter confirmed that he was working on a new movie. It was thrown into a degree of doubt in the middle of 2018 when he took on his new job, but he did confirm at that point also that he was going to complete the film. The plan usually with Pete Docter's films is they work on a 5-year production schedule. A challenge for producer Dana Murray here was the decision was made to contract this one a little bit, and the film start to finish from the point it was greenlit by Pixar, and Docter had to pitch it in the same way that all Pixar films are pitched, would be to complete this one in 4 years. It was a movie too that came with some fairly pronounced technical challenges. Docter said in a Q&A at the London Film Festival that he does sometimes like to lob a grenade into the midst of it all. In particular, the idea in this one that, again, going spoiler free, just to say that this is a movie that blends little moments of 2D animation working alongside 3D animation, and that proved to be a particularly taxing challenge for the Pixar animators who'd never had to do something like that in quite the same way. And when it was first presented to them, the feedback they got was, well, how on earth are we going to do it? To which Docter turned around to them and said in an upbeat way, you'll figure it out, because that's kind of the way that they work on these films, that the challenge is put there and you really have to stretch to be able to meet it. One more particular challenge with this film, and I will touch on it in the interview you're about to hear, is that the movie was originally set for release in the middle of this year, but obviously matters of the pox and the pandemic have taken hold, and so at the point where the world was starting to shut down because of the spread of COVID, the film actually wasn't finished. That it was 7 weeks away from the end of actual production, and it still had a post-production cycle to go through as well. As a consequence, whilst the vast majority of the film was completed at Pixar's campus, it wasn't possible to finish the film that way. At the point where it became clear that animators were going to have to work from home, Docter said again going back to that Q&A I mentioned just before, that the technical department at Pixar sprung into action, that they got backup plans in place, computers were sent to all the various people who needed them, and work could continue on the movie, and it saw it through to fruition. Now, by the sounds of it, it sounds like the bigger impact is going to be on future Pixar productions. The film Luna is coming out next year, and that's been made in the midst of what you could comfortably call all of this, and so there may be some more stories around that to tell if we're lucky enough to talk to the people involved in that film. For the purposes of now, though, I've waffled enough. I want to get you to Pete Docter. I think he's a really fascinating man. I'm going to play you a clip from Soul, and then I'm going to play you my conversation with him.
Music is all I think about. From the moment I wake up in the morning to the moment I fall asleep at night. I was born to play. It's my reason for living. Hello? What the? Wow! Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! Help! I'm not done! Holy! Oh my goodness!
This week, the council. There's a soul missing.
So that was a clip from Soul, and I'm delighted to be joined by its director, by its co-writer, and by, from what I can tell, the emperor of Pixar, Pete Docter. Thank you.
How's it going?
All right. Well, huge congratulations on the film for a start.
Thank you.
I don't know if you're familiar with Richard Linklater's Before trilogy of movies.
I am not.
Okay. What I love about these films is they take a snapshot of someone's life of this couple's life every 4 or 5 years. Well, in fact, I think it's about every 7 or 8 years. But what strikes me is when I come to look at the films that you've made, that they seem just a little bit to be a snapshot of where you are at various points throughout your lives. It's a tenuous link, but I'm kind of going to go with it. And you've always struck me with the films that you've done that there's a lot of your life in the catalyst and the spark of the movies. I wonder if you could just take us into the genesis here and how that does link to you, without wishing to sound like a gossip columnist or anything like that. I'm not
No, I think it's a well observed point. I look back at Monsters Inc., and that was really about me struggling with both wanting to be a filmmaker and a parent, and you see that in the movie and so on all the way to now. And this film was, it was kind of started by wondering, okay, I'm getting older now. Is this really what I'm meant to be doing with my life? I only have a small amount of time left on this planet relative to the universe. How do I make the most of it? And what am I going to leave behind and all that kind of thing? And that just got me questioning that. In addition to that, my own kids were growing up, and I was thinking back to when they were born and realizing that even now I could see a little bit at the moment of when they showed up, a little bit of their personality. And how is that possible? Where did that come from? How do we have a personality before we interact with the world? And so those things tumbled around and became this film.
I'm deliberately going very, very spoiler light because I don't want to spoil a beat of this film for those who haven't seen it. But I do want to ask you about visualizing it, because I don't think I'm going heavily spoilery to say that what you're doing in this film is you're visualizing a lot of invisible things, really. And I mean, reading what you've talked about so far, you've always implied that Inside Out was a very difficult film to make, but this sort of sounds a bit like the End of Level Boss, and I just wonder if you can take us into that.
I kind of think Inside Out was a little bit of a training camp for this, because they both involve very abstract ideas. A lot of the research we did at the very beginning was to talk to rabbis, priests, religious experts, looking at how do these different religions around the world look at the soul? What do they say a soul is? What does it look like? And the words we kept running into are like vaporous, ethereal, non-physical, gaseous, and we're like, okay, how are we going to make a character if it's non-physical? We need something, but we did try to nod to that. I think the final character design has a kind of a foggy feel to it that it tries to not. Obviously, we needed something to be able to put on the screen.
Yeah.
But that was the first challenge. What does a soul look like? And then what does the world where souls live look like, as well? Very tricky stuff.
When people talk about their consulting rabbis, when they're consulting religious figures, often it's because they're telling some kind of biblical story on screen. But it sounds like what you're trying to capture, what you were trying to capture here in your conversations, because I know you brought in quite a lot of consultants on this as well, just to help. It strikes me as tone as much as anything that you're looking to capture. I'm just wondering, what lessons did you particularly pick up that you hadn't considered during those conversations?
Well, it was one of the first concerns when I pitched it was people were like, you're going to piss off half of the world religion. Somebody is going to get, if you say there's reincarnation, then somebody's going to be mad. If you say there's not, somebody's going to be mad. So we wanted to know, where are all the landmines? How are we going to avoid that? But, as soon as we decided that our main character should be African-American, that's when the real controversy came up, because there's been a lot. America has a long and shameful history of not dealing with that very well, and especially this year, boy. So I think our film, working with Kemp Powers, working with the many consultants that we had. In part, it's just a routine of what we do anyway with most of our films. As soon as you find a subject matter, you want to learn as much as you can. So in this case, our main character, African-American jazz pianist who is in Queens. How do we know about that? How do we learn? We went to Queens. We talked to musicians. We talked to teachers. We tried to get into their apartments so we could see what kind of pictures they have of, and psychoanalyze these people so that we can make those characters as real and full as we possibly can.
So if I got this right, it's a 4-year process. This was a slightly quicker film for you and your. It's Dana, the producer, isn't it? She was talking at a presentation yesterday that I heard. Cool. But how far into that process did Joe appear? Because you came up with, you want to tell a story of the soul. You did that. You talked to lots of people, but where did this character in the midst of it land?
That was maybe a year in, maybe not quite that much. Although originally Joe was an actor.
Yeah.
We thought it was very, very clever that he was appearing in Death of a Salesman. And and then he walks into a manhole and dies. But we found that, and I don't know if this is inherent in acting or what, but or maybe just the way we were pulling it off, it felt kind of selfish. It wasn't like a rootable goal. Like it felt like I want to be famous. And so the audience kind of sits back a little and goes, okay, that's not, but somehow music, the arts in general, felt much more noble. Yeah. And music and jazz specifically, you don't get into jazz because you want to be rich and famous. You know? You do it because you love it. You have a passion for it, and that's what we wanted the audience to be behind. This desire and this goal that this guy desperately wants to fulfill.
I've had the joy of speaking. I find animation as an art form fascinating, primarily because I'm terrible at it, and thus I'm genuinely interested in what people are great at that I'm not. And one of the things that really hooks into my head is every director, every writer, every producer of an animated film I've ever spoken to has said that at some point every animated film isn't any good. That there's a part of the process where the film's not working, where it's broken, and where it's almost on a cliff edge. I'm just wondering where were those in this particular project? And because I recall with Inside Out, I think it was the weekend before production, and you hadn't quite landed where that film was. And I remember you gave a really interesting interview where you talked about your anxiety on that and how you resolved that. I just wonder if you could tell us the soul story from that perspective.
I can, but first of all, I have to say you have done your research, sir. That is impressive.
It's a really it's really, because one of the things I'll come back to that in a second. I think it's crucial and the responsibility part on me when having conversations like this is conversations like this can make it reachable, because you to me are doing things I could never do in a million years. I love that and I admire that, but to the person listening to this, how does it become reachable? How does something so a million miles away from what looks possible become something they can do? And when you start talking about this, I think it's vital to that process.
Yeah. Well, one thing that comes to mind, I read an article once by, do you know the magicians Penn and Teller?
Yes, of course.
Teller wrote this amazing article, and he basically said any bit of magic is understandable when you consider that the magician is willing to work way longer and harder than any sane person.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is the same thing. Like anybody could be an animator, anybody could be a storyteller. It's just that you have to have an insane passion for it that drives you to do it day in and day out and for years. And that's that, for better or worse, that's what I have. I started when I was like 8 and have been doing it through my whole life. And I think this film, getting back to your original question, it had a lot of parts along the way where it absolutely stunk. And you watched it, and by that I mean what we do in the making of our films. In addition to writing a script, we will do kind of a comic book version of it and film it with our own dialogue and music and sound effects. We call it story reels, or some people call them animatics. And it's a way of kind of pre-visualizing the film so that before we go through all the hassle of animating it only to find out that it's confusing and boring, we can find that out in these still drawings, and then we can make changes. And throughout the film, there were many, many points where the notes back from our fellow filmmakers at Pixar were like, this is confusing, or this is boring. I'm not really tracking what your main character's doing. And so it's a lot of it's just craft. It's just craft of getting back to understanding I need to set up my character. I need to make him or her rootable so that I'm behind it. The audience feels that, it's one thing to intellectually understand the characters, but really what we're trying to do in filmmaking, and I think any art, is to make people feel something so that they just don't have a choice. They want to watch more of this.
It's also, I think the incredible thing with your films is they've got these enormous ideas in them, but they're very, very human and accessible. And I think without the accessibility, all the work is just lost on a heathen like me at the end of the process. And I'm curious how late in the day that kind of thing is captured, how alert you are to just whether there are entry points to someone who completely the other side of the planet has never met you, doesn't know you at all, and their only gateway into this is your work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's step one. When I first pitched the film, you want to know that there's something in there that is not just personal, uniquely only to me, but that has some sort of universal thing, that we've all wondered about. We've all kind of said, what am I supposed to be doing here in my time? I'm sure there are days, especially in this last year, that people wake up and go like, is it really worth it? What's the point of all this? So that's kind of at the essence, this film, we were trying to hook into that sort of those common themes, what it is to be human. And then you express it in a very specific and unique way that hopefully only you would do.
One of my, I had a lovely long chat once with Don Hahn about the chaos they had at the end of the making of The Lion King, when there was an earthquake in Los Angeles and this incredible movie had to be finished in people's garages. That everyone took it home, put it on their kitchen table, and again, you wouldn't see that from my side of the fence. You just never get. I gather it was 7 weeks from the end of production that you were hit with not dissimilar parallels in that a film being made by a company whose culture has been envied around the world suddenly had to dissipate that culture to people's homes. I appreciate you can distribute all the computers in the world and give people the tech in their home to do it. But how do you remotely manage that culture when you're on the final straight of a movie?
It's an ongoing question. I mean, in the case of us, we were pretty lucky because the majority of the difficult big decisions had already been made and we were just instituting them. So we finished, I think, we had the last couple of weeks of animation and effects and lighting. But we had laid the foundation of what we wanted. For a lot of the films that are being done right now, we have one called Luca, which comes out next summer, and they were right in the thick of it when all this happened. And so they're really, I'd be interested to talk more fully with them about that very question. How do you maintain? I still say, look, there's these are very collaborative, creative endeavors that require physical proximity. You need to be close to someone in both emotionally and maybe even a spiritual way to really connect, so that you're all tapping into the same stream and making the same thing. And maybe the only way we're able to do that now is because we're basing it on a foundation of 20 years of working together. So that would be my guess.
And presumably that makes the entry points for people coming into that just a little bit harder as well.
Yeah, we do have a couple of people who have never actually seen the physical building. That started in the last 6 weeks, and I don't know what life is like for them.
I mean, going to the culture art, I mean, one of the lovely things they do at Aardman, I gather, is they just screen films that you would just think are entirely irrelevant to the film that they're making. My favorite was when they were making Farmageddon, they put on a screening of The Thing. And okay, you might see a little bit of it again in the final film or something, but I'm curious, what kind of touch points were you, because I love the lateralism of the way you go about things. I'm curious, what kind of touch points were you throwing? Were you getting them to watch The Rock or something to do this? I mean, was there something just completely left field?
Well, this film, let's see. I mean, first you come up with the idea, and then inevitably, no matter what it is, you realize, oh, this is kind of like this other thing that's been done. And so you look at those, not only to be inspired, but also to know what's been done, so you don't do the same. And we watched, let's see, Defending Your Life, which is a great
Albert Brooks film.
Really fun. I think that holds up pretty well. Heaven Can Wait, of course, the classic. And the two that we kept coming back to that are sort of pairs are It's a Wonderful Life and Christmas Carol. And they're sort of like, well, there's a whole long discussion about how they're kind of related. So anyway, those were the, and then there was one, this odd Shirley Temple film called Bluebird of Happiness. Which is not very well known, probably for good reason.
But presumably now you're the emperor of the entire company. You can send out a memo insisting everyone watches that at the weekend and then set a test on a Monday. Is that how it works?
No. I mean, we have screenings of current films almost every week. And even guest speakers come in and talk about their films. But every project, we've got 9-10 different films that are in varying stages of production, and every group kind of has its own favorites and films that it focuses in on. So these were just ours.
I think I've got time for about 2 more questions. So I have to talk about Kemp Powers. Because again, I mean, I think sometimes we see a co-director credit on an animated film come after the director credit, and I think I do sometimes wonder if that sells them short a little bit. But I understand that he came onto this a couple of years after you'd started work on it, and I'm curious if you can talk to the perspective that he brought and what, not just to the film but to you as well.
Well, it kind of, as I say, the film started about no humans. It was all just souls. And then we added this human who had been on Earth already, who was an actor. And once we switched to musician, and specifically jazz musician, we thought, well, he's got to be African-American. That's that's the culture that brought this art form to the United States. It would feel wrong if he wasn't. And it didn't feel like a momentous decision at the time, because you try on a lot of things and sometimes they work and then other times you throw them out, but this just stuck. And I realized, geez, I know nothing about what it's like to grow up as an African-American in Queens, New York. And so we interviewed a lot of folks. Kemp happened to grow up in New York. He's African-American. He loves music. In fact, he was a music critic for a number of years, as well as a musician himself. And his son is named Mingus after Charles Mingus. So that's how big a fan he is of jazz. And he brought, first off, we just brought him in as a writer to really click into Joe as a character and bring more specificity to him. And he just kept contributing in so many ways about culture, about design. And so we just said, you know what, he should come on as a co-director.
My final question then, before I'm chucked off, you're in a very small group of people now, of people who are headed up major film companies who are also still making films. And I think to John Lasseter, I think to Joe Roth as well, that he was directing in and around. And I'm curious where that leaves you as a creative force. Does that dampen your appetite or the space you have to pursue feature ideas that you yourself want to make? Do you see yourself more in a role where you're encouraging and bringing more and more talent through? And where are you as a human being? Again, without being going gossip columny.
It's two entirely different things. As a director, at least the way we like to work, we want our films to be driven by the filmmakers. So I feel like my job is not to come in and solve their problems, but more like point them in directions or shape the culture or bring new contributors in or what have you, so that you set up that group to be as successful as possible, which is different. And it's a very different joy. It's a different discipline than directing my own stuff, which is, the fun of exploring things creatively and answering questions for myself and so on. So it's a very different thing. And I think it's probably, I've only been in this job for like 2 years, so it's too early for me to tell if one's going to happen to the exclusion to the other or what have, so it's been fun so far.
Well, you're in charge now, so green light all your movies. That's what I do. I just abuse the power. Pete Docter, it's been an absolute delight. Huge congratulations on the film, and take care.
Thank you, Simon. It was great talking with you.
Take care. And there you have it. That was my conversation with Pete Docter that was recorded after the film premiered at the London Film Festival. The recording was done over one of those fancy Zoom things that I don't fully understand, but hopefully that all came across okay. The film, as I mentioned right at the start, will be available on the Disney Plus streaming service on December the 25th. I really think it's a very special piece of work. You can find a full review of it, a spoiler-free review as well, on the Film Stories website, www.filmstories.co.uk. Which brings me to the end then of this special episode. You can find more from me on Twitter, where I waffle even more, at Simon Brew. You can find the entire Film Stories project on Twitter at Film Stories Pod. On Facebook, you'll find us at facebook.com/filmstoriesonline, at YouTube, youtube.com/filmstories, where we get video exclusive Film Stories bits and bobs waiting for you. And then that aforementioned website, filmstories.co.uk, where you can find out more about our print magazines, and also you can get your every weekday a dose of news and features and lots of movie nerdism. All that's left for me to say is the most important thing, really. Be well, look after yourselves, and take care. I'll be back with the regular episode of Film Stories shortly. Until then, thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.